Morning guys, welcome to today's screencast, continuing the short-term effects of exercise on the cardiorespiratory system. So last week we looked at 4 of the short-term effects of exercise on the cardiorespiratory system. Today we are going to continue and look at the other 4. So first of all, what I want you to do is on Moodle, there is a Microsoft Word document that is titled Cardiorespiratory System Lesson 2. I want you to open that up because during this screencast you're going to answer questions that are asked on that worksheet, and we'll be going through it during this PowerPoint. Okay, so first of all, for the recap, what I want you to do is on the worksheet provided, I'll skip over to that in a minute so you can actually see it. Can you identify the 4 short-term effects of exercise on the cardiorespiratory system we studied last week? Now, if you're here now thinking, I think I know that without any clues whatsoever, can you write it down on the piece of card provided, please, just to test yourself? If not, do not worry. So I'll just go back to the worksheet now. Here is the worksheet. So can you identify the 4 short-term effects of exercise on the cardiorespiratory system we studied last week? 1, 2, 3, 4. They are the 4. Let's see if we can figure out which ones they are from this kind of information here. So the key terms that we're going to be looking at today that we need to know for the assignment and also for the actual things that we're looking at today. We have lactic acid, anaerobic exercise, cardiac output, stroke volume, blood pressure. Within blood pressure, we also have systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. Now, throughout this PowerPoint, I will give you the definitions for these key terms. So what I want you to do is, when we're going through the PowerPoint and you see the key terms, you're going to have to come back to this and fill this in as you go along. Okay, so when we talk about lactic acid, I'll mention the definition and you write it in there. Whilst we're going through the PowerPoint on lactic acid, you have these questions to answer as well. So you need to keep pausing the PowerPoint and flicking back to this, or you can have the screen split in 2 so you can actually see both screens. So if we get started, what I want you to do now is hold a squat position for 2 minutes. Okay, don't get distracted by anyone else. Don't start looking around if you see someone standing up. Okay, you are going to be holding the squat at a 90-degree angle. After this, I want you to write down how your legs are feeling. Now, if you're asking me how I'm going to know 2 minutes, what you need to do is go into Google and type in online stopwatch. Here, a stopwatch will appear. You press play on it or you press start and it will do a 2-minute countdown for you. So if you can do that for me, please. And where I want you to write down your answer is here. So hold a squat position for 2 minutes, use an online stopwatch. Please write down how your legs are feeling. So are they burning? Do they feel fine? Are they aching? Just whatever you feel, can you please write that down for me? Thank you. So lactic acid in the blood. Lactic acid is a natural byproduct of exercise that is produced when carbohydrates are broken down to release energy, i.e. when we use carbohydrates for fuel, for energy, for how we run. Now, this is a definition, so if you go back to your key terms and you write this now into your definitions, you'll have the definition for lactic acid. So the burning sensation you feel in your muscles after anaerobic exercise is caused by a buildup of lactic acid. So that burning sensation is lactic acid. Now, anaerobic exercise, one of the key terms, what this means is exercising without oxygen as a main way of releasing energy. So certain activities that this requires are a 100-meter sprint. So you're not using oxygen. We are not kind of converting oxygen to energy at this point. We're using ATP. So we're exercising without oxygen. And that's what anaerobic exercise means. Another one is, say, sprints in cycling, 400 meters. Down here, rowing, short distance rowing, okay? We are not using oxygen as energy. We're using ATP. So whilst exercising without using oxygen as a fuel source, your body will use carbohydrates. This is in the food we eat: pasta, potatoes, rice, etc. As carbs are broken down into energy, lactic acid is produced in the muscles as a protective mechanism. This causes your body to reduce your performance by slowing you down, and this will allow you to cover and rebuild your oxygen stores. So when you're exercising, you're slowly running out of energy. Your body doesn't want you to actually continue to exercise because essentially you will collapse, which is not ideal. So what your body does is think, okay, I'm running out of energy here. I need to stop myself from performing. Therefore, I'm going to produce lactic acid. because once I produce lactic acid, you're going to stop performing. Therefore, it's a protective mechanism against you performing for longer than you should be, therefore collapsing. So that's what lactic acid actually is there for. It's a protective mechanism. So after exercise, what two things can be performed to help remove lactic acid? If you just pause it here now and actually have a think about the two things that you think may actually help remove lactic acid. One, you should know. The other one, it'd be very good if you get it. So just pause it now. Right, okay, so cool down. This keeps blood vessels dilated, which means lactic acid can be removed quickly. So dilated vasodilation, our blood vessels widen. They widen so we can get oxygen to the working muscles and remove carbon dioxide. So the reason we actually do a cool down after exercise is we've got loads of carbon dioxide within our muscles. So therefore we go for a nice, slow, steady jog, which means our blood is still flowing around the body, which means you're getting oxygen to the working muscles and removing this carbon dioxide, which will reduce the risk of DOMS the next day or reduce lactic acid the next day. So that is why you actually do a cool down. The other thing is a sports massage. Now, sports massage can also help remove lactic acid due to the fact that we're applying pressure to the muscles and we're pushing up on the muscle, which is helping a pumping action of removing carbon dioxide from the muscles. So what I want you to do now is go through the PowerPoint that we've just done, so the previous slide on lactic acid and this one, and why do you think people might experience a high lactic acid buildup during intense workouts? So if I go back, I know what anaerobic exercise means, working without oxygen. I know that intense exercise means that it's short duration, it's quick, it's fast. Do I have time to convert oxygen for energy? I might not be able to, might I? So I might be using my anaerobic exercise there. So if you can just answer this question for me on the Word document, that would be great. So, cardiac output. So, cardiac output is also a short-term effect of exercise on the cardiorespiratory system. So, what is cardiac output and what happens to it? So, cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped out of the heart per minute. Now, if you go back to your key terms, you'll have cardiac output. So, if you can get this term here into it. So, cardiac output, the amount of blood pumped out of the heart per minute. The equation is heart rate times stroke volume equals cardiac output. Now, what happens to our heart rate during exercise? It increases. So does stroke volume. So, if we're exercising, what do you think is going to happen to carbon dioxide? Sorry about that. So, heart rate times stroke volume equals cardiac output. So we know that heart rate increases during exercise and so does stroke volume. Therefore, cardiac output is also going to increase. Now, if you can't remember what stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped out of the heart per beat. So this increases due to exercise because we're trying to get oxygen to the working muscles and trying to remove carbon dioxide. So during exercise, there can be an increase of up to 8 times resting cardiac output. And we need that to get oxygen to the working muscles and to remove carbon dioxide. So, blood pressure. Blood pressure is also another short-term effect of exercise on the cardiorespiratory system. So, blood pressure equals cardiac output, which we know is heart rate times stroke volume, and we know that this increases due to exercise, and resistance to blood flow within the blood vessels. Therefore, as cardiac output increases, so will blood pressure. So, blood pressure has two readings. Systolic pressure, which is when the heart pumps blood. So when your heart is contracting and blood is getting pumped out of the left ventricle, systolic pressure will be quite high because there's pressure in the arteries due to that pumping mechanism. And then we also have diastolic pressure when the heart is relaxing and filling with blood. So once you've pumped out blood from the heart needs to obviously fill with blood. Therefore, during that time, we call that diastolic pressure, and this is when it is relaxing. And the blood pressure during that time will not be that high. So a healthy blood pressure value is 120 over 80. So the 120 is systolic, so when the blood is actually pumping, and the 80 is diastolic, when the heart is actually filling with blood. So during aerobic exercise, which is long-term exercise where we're using oxygen as energy, your systolic blood pressure will increase, whereas your diastolic blood pressure will remain unchanged. Now, your systolic blood pressure increases because we know that cardiac output has increased, i.e. our heart is pumping more. Okay, so it's putting more blood out per beat and per minute, which means there's more pressure on the arteries. So there's more pressure during systolic blood pressure. However, during high intensity activities, i.e. weightlifting, both systolic and diastolic blood pressure increase. This is because your large muscle groups press against your blood vessels, which increases the resistance to the flow of blood. So when your heart is filling with blood, i.e. diastolic blood pressure, the blood pressure actually increases due to the fact that there are muscle groups pushing on your arteries. Okay, and the last one we need to look at is increased tidal volume. So tidal volume is the amount of air inhaled and exhaled per breath. So during exercise, carbon dioxide levels increase in the muscles. The brain tells the muscles responsible for breathing to work harder so that it can remove the unwanted CO2 quickly. Now, if you remember last week, it does this due to chemoreceptors in the muscles. So chemoreceptors in the muscles realize there's too much carbon dioxide in the muscles. So that sends a message to the brain, which tells the muscles around the lungs to start breathing heavier, deeper, quicker, which means you can get more oxygen to the working muscles faster, meaning we can remove that CO2 and actually get oxygen to the muscles, which means we can perform for longer. So tidal volume increases during exercise as more oxygen is needed by the working muscles and more CO2 is needed to be removed. CO2 is carbon dioxide. So what I want you to do now, once you've filled out the actual worksheet and completed the worksheet, is continue with the worksheet I gave you last week, where you're actually explaining what happens to all of these situations when it comes to short-term effects of exercise on the cardiorespiratory system. Okay, thank you.